if the law we operate under now is law of faith, law of spirit of life, the law of Christ, the law of liberty, the royal law, which, by the way, the law of liberty won't be a term used for the Mosaic law or the Old Covenant. You just have to ask yourself, Romans 2, Romans 8, Romans 3, 1 Corinthians 9, Galatians 6, James 1 and 2. What is now our relationship under this new covenant or new law of faith, of Christ, of the Spirit of life? What is our relationship with specifically dietary laws, Sabbath? And again, I feel like I have to preface this. I think I made it pretty clear that our relationship with the Mosaic law is that it's been fulfilled by Jesus, so I can now function under a new law in which the Mosaic law itself has a different function and purpose now that I'm in this new covenant under the law of Christ. Because again, I gave you categories yesterday for there are things in the Mosaic law that have changed function, been fulfilled in terms of they've vanished away, they're obsolete. That's the language of Hebrews, not mine. Okay? But at the same time, that it still rings true that Jesus fulfills the law and doesn't abolish it. So again, when we talk about Sabbath, when we talk about dietary laws, I am not telling people not to obey these laws if they feel led, if they feel convicted, if your conscience testifies. I feel personally, that's fine. I am not encouraging people to not do these things. Hear me, hear me. I am telling people that you should think about why you're doing them. And secondly, do not make it an objective law or requirement for all of God's people. What I'm about to tell you is that I don't believe the dietary laws or the Sabbath itself is a requirement or absolute, this is how to obey God. And if you're not doing these things, you're not obeying Him. In other words, I don't believe the dietary laws or Sabbath keeping now in the new covenant has anything to do with truly obeying or being sanctified. Again, if your conscience testifies to it, go ahead. I'm not saying not. I encourage people to keep the Sabbath. Do you have to? I don't believe so. So why would you encourage something you don't have to? Because not everything good is absolutely required as a command, right? It's good for me to not walk in the road and stand there in the middle of the freeway, just trying to dodge cars as they're coming at me. That's a good thing to not do. Do I need the Bible to instruct it as a clear command? And you're conflating morality with actual sound wisdom. Okay. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1. Since the law, and this is going to preface dietary laws and Sabbath keeping and even feasts, stuff like that. Since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifices that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near. What did he say the law has? Does it have the true form or the reality of the good things that are now spiritually, eternally valuable to us? No. He says the law has. It seems to be a restrictive statement. Here's how far the law can take you. Here's its function. It just is a shadow of the good things that come in Christ. Okay? Colossians 2, the entire chapter, will also, I believe, verify this. And yes, I'm going to read the whole chapter. It's a big one. So buckle up. Go get your coffee. Go take a shower and unwind if you're really mad at me. But let's read Colossians 2. And then I'll get into scriptures that specifically address dietary laws or Sabbath keeping. Okay? So, I want you to know how great a struggle I have for you, Paul says. For those at Laodicea, for all who have not seen me face to face, that their hearts may be encouraged, being knit together in love to reach all the riches of full assurance of understanding and the knowledge of God's mystery, which is Christ, So the mystery hidden within both the law and the prophets in the entire Hebrew Bible, the mystery that was concealed, the underlying wisdom within every law, what the law and prophets testified and prophesied of, is Jesus. Jesus is Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. I say this in order that no one may delude you with plausible arguments. Why does Paul put Christ up front as the ultimate treasure and wealth of our existence? Because there are people creeping into the Colossian church that are trying to bring Christ lower by putting other things above him or alongside him as necessary for salvation. And they're plausible arguments. Like, they're reasonable. I think that's what the word plausible means. Let's not be dumb on a live stream, huh? Let's actually look that up. Plausible. Seeming reasonable or probable. Ah, yes, good. I'm not an idiot. It's always a relief, right? Okay. So there are very strong arguments coming into the Colossian church, and Paul's saying, these things are taking you away from the true substance, Jesus, the true wisdom and knowledge of God, the mystery that's concealed in the Old Testament. Even though I'm absent in the body, I'm with you in spirit. I'm rejoicing to see your good order and the firmness of your faith in Christ. So, these plausible arguments that people are bringing into the Colossian church seem to be at odds with or violating the firmness of faith of the Colossians. Now watch. Specifically, these plausible arguments are going to have to do with things of the body, things of the material world, things that, weirdly enough, have their basis in the law of Moses. These are not just Gentile pagan ideas. These are not just twistings of the Mosaic law. Watch what he says. Therefore, as you received Christ Jesus the Lord, walk in him, rooted and built up in him and established in the faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy, empty deceit. But that deceit and those philosophical plausible arguments are according to human tradition, and they're according to the elemental spirits of the world. Where else is this used? I think it's in Galatians. Nonetheless, the deception coming into the church has to do with human tradition, which you go, oh yes, that's just the Pharisaical teachings that are in violation of the law of Moses, never were prescribed by God. But the elemental spirits of the world here actually can be translated elementary principles of the world, or elemental principles. So not just elementary in their basis, not just like a low-level kind of thing, like this is obvious and this is something you should learn early, but elemental, having to do right here with the material physical world, not according to Christ. So whatever they're bringing in, the deception, it's not according to Christ. And he'll explain what these are in about verse 16. Okay, so hold on to that. Human tradition, elemental spirits of the world. In other words, things that have to do with material, physical, earthly things. Okay, in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. Why would Paul say that right after this? Whatever verse 8 is communicating, the deceptions, the philosophies, the plausible arguments, those things seem to be at odds with the fact that Jesus is God in the flesh. Or you might say, Paul is going to push back against these arguments and present the solution as, hey, Jesus is God in the flesh. In him the whole fullness of deity dwells. And you've been filled in him, who is the head of all rule and authority. In him also you were circumcised, with a circumcision made without hands. And you're like, I don't remember that when I signed up to follow Jesus. By putting off the body of the flesh. It's a spiritual circumcision of Christ. And it's related to baptism, spiritual baptism, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God, who raised him from the dead, and you who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh. Whoa. I think he's speaking to Gentiles, huh? God made alive together with Christ, having forgiven us all our trespasses. How? By canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This record of debt, which seems to imply the law and what it demands of us, and if we don't fulfill the law, what it demands we experience, death is the just penalty for sin. That record of debt, he set aside, nailing it to the cross. Now, I'm not saying the law of Moses was nailed to the cross and reading anything into this. All I'm saying is what the law required of us and the debt we owe and the sin we committed, that was nailed to the cross. And when Jesus does this, he's disarming the rulers, authorities, and putting them to open shame by triumphing over them. Okay? In Christ. Now watch. With all that up front, why does Paul, before he gets to the specific arguments and philosophies and deceitfulness that's coming into the church, before he gets to the specifics, why does he preface it with, hey, these are elemental spirits of the world, according to human tradition, and then he goes off on how great Jesus is. He's God in the flesh, he's raised you to life, he's dealt with your sin, because all those beautiful realities we have in Christ, they're being undermined by whatever it is these people are bringing into the church. In other words, whatever these arguments are, seem to be pushing against all the blessings and the beautiful things we have in the Messiah. Therefore, because Christ has triumphed over the rulers' authority, over sin, over death, in light of that, therefore, don't let no one pass judgment on you. Can I control what judgments people make about me? No. Can I control whether or not I submit to their judgment and agree with it? Totally. If someone says something about you and goes, you're a false prophet, I can choose to believe that judgment and come under it, or I can choose to discard it. I think what Paul is saying here is the judgments that are coming against the Colossian church in the form of deceitful philosophies that have to do with the elemental spirits of this world. And you might say, well, it's an elementary principles. That's different. No, it's not. Because the elementary principles of Christ found in Hebrews chapter 5 and 6 provide the foundation for what he does for us. The Mosaic law, all the traditions, he does fulfill all that. He is the substance of it. So those are basic things you learn to come into Christ if you're a Jewish person. You see him as the fulfillment of that, right? So let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink. Now you go, well, it's not saying anything about dietary laws. Okay. Or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These, I think if we're to pair this with the food and drink, it seems most likely that this has to do with whatever we see in the law of Moses that has to do with food and drink. Dietary laws, sacrificial offering laws, whatever the laws are for the people who are bringing certain sacrifices and how much they can actually, participate in that and consume that. So the judgment people are bringing into the Colossian church, it's a deception. It's promoting the elemental spirits of the world. That's what their deceit is rooted in. It's bringing in these ideas that Paul is saying, don't let anyone pass judgment on you in questions about these things. And you go, well, hold on. I think Paul is actually saying that believers are doing these things and other people coming into the church are saying, you don't need to do these things. And so Paul is saying, stand your ground. Don't let them deceive you. That would be reasonable if we didn't see the next verse. When you read verse 17, that verse seems to be at odds with the concept that Paul is affirming dietary laws, affirming that you are required to hold to the festivals and you're required to hold the new moon and Sabbath. That verse 17 kind of robs that argument of its teeth. These are a shadow of the things to come. But the substance belongs to who? Christ. If Paul's argument was, hey guys, these things are required, don't let anyone tell you otherwise, he wouldn't say these are just a shadow of what Christ brings. He's the substance. He's the one casting the shadow. He's the fulfillment. He achieves its end. He wouldn't say that he's the substance. He would say, guys, Jesus came to fulfill the law, but also, you need to do these things. They're required. It seems like he's saying the opposite by claiming that they're just a shadow of the things to come, which actually agrees with Hebrews chapter 10. Remember Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1? Remember, the law has but, or just, a shadow of the good things to come. The true form of these realities, Christ. So, that's why Paul stopped mid-writing and goes, before I address these arguments and the deception, let me remind you who Christ is, so that now they see food and drink, dietary laws assumed if we're relating this to the book of Moses, festivals, new moon, Sabbaths, so that the Colossian church sees these things in light of Jesus' work on the cross. Because again, people are, I believe, look at verse 18, let no one disqualify you insisting on asceticism. Hold on. What's asceticism? What's escape? Severe self-discipline and avoidance of certain forms of indulgence, typically for religious reasons. In other words, asceticism is taking physical, material, earthly things and abstaining from that, which seems to be closely connected to the kind of heresy that was being addressed in 1 John. But I can't remember the terminology for that. But this is a severe self-discipline where you go, this is a spiritual thing for me to stay away from certain physical, worldly things. Those are bad. That was the lie perpetuating the early church, especially 1 John addressing, which is, hey, everything of the world, it's bad. Stay away from it. Spirit is good, flesh bad, material bad, world bad. And it's like, well, is it? And so people are creeping into the church, insisting on severe self-discipline, abstaining from certain physical material things, engaging in certain material physical activities that are borderline self-abusive, but for religious reasons, to feel more spiritual. In other words, they're attaching a higher degree of spirituality to certain physical material abstaining. If I stay away from this, I'm more holy, I'm more spiritual, I'm more righteous, I gain a higher status in the kingdom. Let no one disqualify you. From what? Let no one pass judgment on you. About what? Well, about these things. And by passing judgment about these things on the Colossian church, these liars and false teachers are trying to disqualify them. From what? From everything he just said Christ has done for them. You were dead in your trespasses, now you're alive. You're forgiven. Christ paid for your sin. He triumphed over the spiritual forces of evil in your place for you, gained your victory, and now you're ultimately triumphing in him, and you participate in his victory over sin, death, and the devil. That's yours. There are people creeping into the church using certain things that actually have connections to the book of Moses, and they're using them to disqualify believers from their inheritance in Christ. Now you might say, well, they're making it an issue of salvation. That's what it means. They're saying dietary laws, festivals, keeping Sabbath, you have to do these things to be saved. If you say these things are required of the believer to effectively honor, obey, and serve God, is that pretty close to starting to make it about salvation? Because you're saying, well, the fruit will be these things. Well, if I don't do these things, then you say the fruit isn't there, and therefore my faith is invalid. So doesn't it become a question of salvation at some point when it reaches its logical end? Let no one disqualify you. Insisting on asceticism and worship of angels. Going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by their sensuous mind, not holding to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God. Now you go, I don't think he's talking about like, you know, specific dietary laws or clean or unclean laws. I think he really drives it home in verse 20. If with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world. What are those elemental spirits he's referring to? Things regarding food, drink, festivals, which sounds like the Jewish feasts. New moon, Sabbath. Sabbath's only in the law of Moses. So the elemental spirits of the world, apparently, Paul wants you to know you died to those things. Well, he's not saying we died to them entirely, like they don't apply to us now. We died to the requirement they had over us so that we couldn't be saved because we couldn't meet them. Okay, why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations? Don't handle. Clean or unclean laws. Don't taste. Dietary laws. Don't touch. Clean or unclean laws found in the book of Moses, referring to things that all perish as they're used, according to human precepts and teachings. Look, they have indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body. They are of no value in stopping the indulgence of the flesh. So this doesn't seem to be about seeing these things as necessary for salvation. Paul goes so far as to say, you know, these things, these regulations, these elemental spirits of the world that have to do with the physical and the material and the present world, they don't have any value in actually stopping the passions and sinful desires of the flesh. Now, there can be a case made that fasting and staying away from food to rely on God, that is a good, like Jesus expects his people to do that. And it does have a spiritual translation, like it does translate into spiritual strength to resist sin. I get that. But what these people are tempted to see are these regulations. Don't handle that, don't touch that. Not in a salvific way, but in a required way to actually go and live the life Christ called them to. And just to like nail it, pun intended, because Jesus nailed this to the cross, just to really nail it down, he says you died to these things. And you go, it's not regulations found in the book of Moses. I'm just using this scripture as a foundation for everything else that's about to be said. As if Acts 15 and Acts 21 and Romans and Titus, as if those weren't enough. And this isn't addressing anything specifically. All I'm trying to show you, I'm not saying dietary laws are not required or not, or they are. I'm just saying Paul is telling people, don't let people pass judgment on you, disqualify you. They say, well, you have to. Really? You have to? I thought Jesus triumphed over. I thought the legal demands of sin were nailed to the cross. Is there a way to, I don't know. I won't go there because I know that will just, it'll probably have the wrong effect. I don't want to do that. The point is, the things we've died to, the things that, weirdly enough, the book of the law and the book of Moses, what they had to do with were physical, material things of this world. Temple, actual building. Priesthood, actual people doing actual service. Table of showbread, actual physical thing. Animal sacrifices, real physical animals, real blood being shed. Not that Jesus' blood wasn't real. But the point is, all these things are material in nature. Don't eat this, don't touch that. That's unclean. That's clean. There's mold in your house. All these things are having to do with this physical material world. Whereas Colossians 2 and Hebrews 10 says all of that is but a shadow to be fulfilled by Jesus, who is the substance and the reality. And guess what Jesus does? He doesn't just fulfill the demands of the law. There's prophetic declaration within every single one of the laws that you find in the book of Moses. Each of those laws have underlying wisdom and prophetic utterance of Jesus. And if you miss that, you will look to the law of Moses as if it is required. Now hold on. I haven't even begun to make my case. The game hasn't even started. This is warm up. Matthew 15, 10 through 11. Now we address dietary laws. Don't eat this, eat this. God's dishonored if you eat it. You're required to eat this if you're God's people. You're required not to eat that if you're God's people. Jesus calls the people to him and he says, look, hear and understand. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a person, but what comes out of the mouth. Well, this defiles a person. Now you go, yes, on a spiritual, eternal level. Well, absolutely. But also, watch what he does. Then the disciples came and said, you know the Pharisees were offended when they heard this. Why would they be offended? Well, number one, they have told people that they do need to be concerned with what they eat because they see that in the law of Moses. Now, of course, you can say the religious leaders twisted this and made it more oppressive and made it more of a demand and made it something it was never to be. But look at what Jesus does. He answered, every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be rooted up. Leave them alone. They're blind guides. And if the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. For people to think that they're defiled, which, let me just look at the word real quick so no one can say I did not. In real time. Okay. Word defile there. I'm tempted to just say to make unclean. Let's just read. Okay. To make unclean, to pollute, to desecrate, to regard or treat as common or unclean. Okay. Now that I've made my case, that word is actually speaking to what the law of Moses talks about when it says clean or unclean. Clean or unclean animals, clean or unclean skin disease, clean or unclean bodies, and you touched a dead body. That concept Jesus is bringing into. Is he violating the law of Moses by saying this? No, he's clarifying. That's all that Jesus does. He clarifies. What you ate or didn't eat was never an issue of your spiritual standing before God. But, okay, he'll go on to say this in Mark 7. He will, and the author, Mark, will insert some commentary. There you go, oh, that doesn't belong there. Clearly that wasn't fair. Look at, he called the people and he says the same thing. All of you understand there's nothing outside a person that going into you can defile you. The things that come out of a person are what defile them. Same concept in the book of Moses, clean or unclean. And when he entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable, because they're not smart. And he said, well, are you also without understanding? Like, you got to really drive that knife in, don't you, Jesus? Don't you see that whatever goes into a person from outside can't defile him, cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart? So where's the source or issue or basis of defilement? The heart, but his stomach, and is expelled. And you go, well, for an Israelite to disobey the dietary laws of Israel, of God, that was a proof that their heart was defiled. Okay, look what Jesus does here. Thus he declared all foods, what does it say? It says clean. That's right, Hummel. What comes out of a person is what defiles him. And you go, not a strong enough case. If you go to Peter's vision, I understand that some people read this vision and they go, God is just working with a category Peter understood in the book of Moses to make a statement about Gentile people, not about animals. I've heard that argument. Let's see if that holds water. Peter's on the roof after Cornelius, I believe, is told, hey, send some boys. I got a guy named Peter waiting for you, which is cool. The next day, as they were on their journey, left Cornelius to go and find Peter. Peter went up on the housetop about the 6th hour to pray. He became hungry, and he wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance, like you do. And he saw the heavens opened, and something like a great sheet descending, being let down by its four corners upon the earth. Okay. Now again, God could have used any other vision to communicate the fact that Cornelius and the Gentile boys and girls are now clean by the Spirit of God. They can believe, they can have faith, they can be cleansed, all that. Okay, and you go, well, he doesn't. So that's that. It's fine. In it were all kinds of animals, reptiles, birds. And there came a voice to him. Rise, Peter, kill and eat. Seems a bit deceptive for God to tell Peter to eat something that is merely a demonstration of the fact that Gentiles are now clean through faith. Doesn't that seem quite deceptive on the part of God to do that, if indeed this has nothing to do with animals? Peter said, by no means, Lord. Now, I understand real quick that in Old Testament, prophecy doesn't always come attached with the understanding or the interpretation. I get that. Sometimes God does work with visions, and he leaves it up to the person to figure that out or go to someone else, and God is working in beautiful ways, okay? But what Peter sees here, I don't believe is only a symbol of what God is doing in the Gentile world. I think he's actually making a statement about the vision he's seeing, animals, clean, unclean, and about the Gentiles who can be represented by unclean animals, right? Pigs, dogs, vultures, that kind of thing. So Peter said, no way, Lord, I've never eaten anything that is common or unclean. Why? Because that would defile an Israelite. And the voice came and said, what God has made clean, do not call common. This happened 3 times. Bruh, 3 times? Was Peter supposed to get the vision's interpretation at some point and God just kept trying? Or is the repetition of the vision supposed to be connected to something else going on in the narrative? I don't know. This happened 3 times and the thing was taken up at once to heaven. And by the way, Peter still doesn't get it. All he knows is he saw a bunch of clean, unclean animals come down. God goes, go ahead, Peter, kill and eat. No! Hey, don't call common what I've made clean. Well, Peter was inwardly perplexed. Let's just make that our Facebook status for the next month. Like, I'm just inwardly perplexed. I feel like that's me most of my life. As to what the vision he saw might mean. Did he understand the vision? Not yet. I'm sure he's wrestling with it, though. Behold, the men who were sent by Cornelius, having made inquiry for Simon's house, they stood at the gate. And they called out to whether Simon, who was called Peter, was lodging there. While Peter was pondering the vision, do you see the emphasis on Peter not understanding and needing to meditate? This will play into when we go into our series on prophecy and what it actually means to receive prophetic insight or vision from God. It doesn't always mean there's a guaranteed instantaneous interpretation. Sometimes it's progressive. So, while Peter's pondering the vision, the Spirit said, who did? The Spirit. Behold, 3 men are looking for you. Oh, interesting. The vision repeated 3 times. There are 3 men sent to see Peter. And he goes, I will go down. Rise and go down, accompany them without hesitation. I have sent them. It seems to have a connection to the fact that God says, I have made clean what was once called common. Peter went down to the men and said, I am the one you're looking for, which must be a really weird interaction. Why are you here? And they said, well, Cornelius, I know you don't know him, he's a centurion, an upright, God-fearing man, well spoken of by the whole Jewish nation. You know, that resume. He was directed by a holy angel to send for you, to come to his house. Now, if they had come here without God validating this with a vision, I'm sure Peter would have been way more hesitant. Okay? But even with an unclear vision, he has enough of God's support and confirmation to go with them. Even though they're Gentiles, unclean, not a part of the holy Jewish chosen nation of God. Chosen. A holy angel to send for you to come to his house, and we are supposed to hear what you have to say. So he invited them in to be his guests. That right there already seems off, because as a Jewish person, you should not have people who are unclean in your house. So what's going on? Peter's at least getting a sense of what is eventually going to happen. The next day he rose, went away with them, and some of the brothers from Joppa accompanied him. So now Peter's going out there with a band of Jewish brothers and sisters, or brothers. And on the following day they entered Caesarea. Cornelius was expecting them. I love this. He called together his relatives and close friends. By the way, Cornelius has no idea what he's going to hear. He has no idea what's going to happen. And he just invited his family and his friends to an unknown party. We don't know what's going to happen. When Peter entered, Cornelius met him, fell down at his feet, and worshipped him. Peter lifted him up, saying, "Come on, bro, stand up. I too am a man." As he talked with him, he went in and found many people gathered. Peter's used to this. He likes crowds now at this point. And he said to them, "You yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone of another nation." Okay, so this gets cleared up now in Acts 10, that it is okay for Jewish people to actually interact with and have relationship with, Gentile people. That's why in Acts 15, I said what I said earlier, okay? Because at least at that point, years have passed. So I think Galatians, when Paul confronts Peter, and he goes, yeah, Peter was eating with Gentiles and the circumcision party was coming. I don't think the issue there was just that he was eating. It's already been established well back in chapter 10 that God's fine with that. So I don't think that was the issue. I think it has to do with foods. And I think this story actually relates very neatly to that passage in Galatians. So he says, look, you know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with anyone of another nation, but God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. And this is where people will go, see, he doesn't say animals. That's an argument from silence. Just because he doesn't say that the vision was about, unclean people doesn't mean it wasn't about unclean animals. I'll get to that when I get to that. Verse 29, so when I was sent for, I came without objection. So I asked then why you sent for me. Cornelius said, 4 days ago, about this hour, I was praying at the 9th hour, and behold, a man stood before me in bright clothing. And he said, Cornelius, your prayers have been heard. Your alms have been remembered before God. So send people to Joppa, ask for Simon, who is called Peter. He's lodging in the house of Simon, a tanner by the sea. So I sent for you at once. And you've been kind enough to come. Now, we're all here in the presence of God. We want to hear what you've been commanded by the Lord. Peter opened his mouth and said, truly, I understand. Oh, something's happening now. Remember how he didn't understand the vision prior to this? The interpretation of the vision is slowly unpacked, like real time. I understand God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. As for the word he sent to Israel, preaching good news of peace through Jesus, he's Lord of all. You yourselves know what happened throughout all Judea. Beginning from Galilee, after the baptism John proclaimed, God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power. He went about doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil. Why? God was with him. And we're witnesses of all that he did both in the country of the Jews and in Jerusalem. They put him to death by hanging him on a tree. But God raised him on the third day and made him to appear not to all the people, but to us who had been chosen by God as witnesses, who ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. And then he commanded us to preach to the people and to testify that he's the one appointed by God to be judge of the living and the dead. And to him, all the prophets bear witness. Everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name. And then you're going to see, that the Spirit of God falls on these people, and Peter's amazed, and he goes, well, they have the gift of the Holy Spirit, and they're speaking in tongues, and something's going on. God's confirming his hand on the Gentiles. Let's get these people baptized. So the whole vision God gave Peter, people have argued, only relates to what he did in the Gentiles' lives, how he's just opening a door. But again, God could have used any vision. Specifically, he chose to use animals that were clean and unclean to demonstrate, I have declared what you used to call common, now clean. So the question becomes, with the Gentiles being declared clean by God, is there possibly biblical reasoning to say, along with that comes other things that used to be unclean that are now clean? In other words, I'm hinting at dietary laws. Let me take you to Romans 14. As for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, not to quarrel over opinions. One person believes he can eat anything. Now you go, well, he's just talking about like meat sacrificed to idols. He'll go on. One person believes he can eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Notice how the person that has a stronger conscience towards things like foods, Paul actually refers to them as weaker in faith. Not making a statement about what you think about food, but the degree to which you think that has spiritual implications and how strongly, how sensitive you are to things like that can be an indication of, not always, but can be an indication of spiritual growth that's needed and understanding that's lacking. So verse 3, let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains. Don't let the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It's before his own master that he stands or falls. He will be upheld. The Lord is able to make him stand. Scroll down to verse 14. I know and I am persuaded in the Lord Jesus. Now watch this startling statement that people will find any way to work around because they hold so strictly to the dietary laws. Listen. Paul goes, I'm persuaded in the Lord Jesus that nothing is unclean in itself. Does he say no one? He says nothing. But it is unclean for anyone who thinks it is unclean. So do you remember how I said, I'm not telling anyone not to hold to the dietary laws? Okay? All I want is for your convictions and your conscience to be rooted in a proper understanding of Scripture. Because if you misinterpret and that informs your conscience and your convictions, you start to hold people to standards that frankly God doesn't. And you make a personal conviction an objective command. And I think Paul is warning that we don't do that. Nothing is unclean in itself. But if your conscience testifies to the fact that it is unclean, Paul in Romans, 12 verses earlier will say maybe like that's a weak person who has to grow up in understanding, or maybe that conviction will follow them the rest of their life. But that conviction shouldn't be pressed upon everyone. Why? Because nothing's unclean in itself. Go down to verse 20. Do not, for the sake of food, destroy the work of God. Everything is indeed clean. What did Paul say? Anything regarding food is indeed clean. So does this relate to the vision Peter was given? Can we say that that vision was only about the people and not about anything within the Mosaic law that was once unclean and now is clean? I think we're starting to see reasons to believe that the dietary laws maybe aren't requirement anymore for the people of God in the new covenant. Everything is indeed clean, but it's wrong for anyone to make another stumble by what he eats. It's good not to eat meat or drink wine or do anything that causes your brother to stumble. And you go, he's just addressing meat. He doesn't say every kind of meat is clean. He doesn't say no kind of meat is unclean. He says everything, to cover all the bases, just to be clear. And we looked at Colossians 2, the laws that are don't handle, don't taste, don't touch. Paul goes, look, you died to those things. Why? Because he fulfilled it. Jesus fulfilled it. Titus chapter 1 says, to the pure, all things are pure. To the defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. Interesting. So this is an issue of spiritual cleanliness, right? Not an issue of physical one. Now, how I relate with my body and what I use my body for doesn't at all change the fact that I'm cleansed and washed in the sight of God. Not a license to sin, but the point is, okay, our bodies are given to us as a gift of God to use and give back to Him in an honorable way. So don't commit sexual immorality. Don't be doing dumb things. Don't be cursing people with your lips. But when it comes to absolute purity, not just purity in lifestyle, but being pure in the sight of God, that's a work of Jesus. And now my life over time should begin to reflect that. And to that person that is pure by the work of Jesus and has witnessed to that purity and faith by their life over time. Well, Paul is saying, well, to that pure person, all things are pure. That doesn't mean everything is now permissible and now I can just do whatever I want. There's no commands for me because Christ fulfilled it. That means specifically regarding what once defiled or was called unclean in the Mosaic law. It seems to be that now to the person who is pure, which is what the heart and wisdom behind those laws was always about. It was always about giving humanity a category, for God does see something as clean and unclean. And you go, yeah, those categories are eternal. I think the categories for animals being clean and unclean was a temporary seasonal thing he did in Israel to make an eternal point about our spiritual nature. To begin giving humanity the categories for some people are clean and some people are unclean based on their relationship with and to God. And you're pure because of Christ, and you're impure if you're not in him. And the dietary laws were physical, visible, material symbols of a greater, deeper wisdom and reality, which is people are clean or unclean. Not because of what they do or don't eat, but because of the nature of their relationship with God or lack of. So these people, both their minds and their consciences are defiled. They profess to know God, but they deny him by their works. They're detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work. So, let me take it to Hebrews 9. I understand people's frustration with this and the need, almost the want to find a workaround, because maybe you've been educated for so long on the other side of this that you can't see this. You refuse to. All I'm trying to show you is that biblically, New Covenant precedence, New Testament witness, is that we aren't required as the people of God to hold to the dietary laws. Colossians 2, Hebrews 10 makes it very clear. Everything in the Mosaic law, at the bare minimum, was a symbol, a shadow of Jesus and all that he would do. Some things functioned seasonally for the people of Israel as an actual thing they did to bear witness to the wisdom that Jesus would fulfill and bring, and the substance he would bring. Some things played their role and their function changes. I've already gone over that. So again, if there's a change in the priesthood, Hebrews makes it clear that along with that comes a change in the law. Now, you don't get to decide what that is. God has made that clear. And I think we're starting to see in Hebrews 9, 8 through 10. By this, the Holy Spirit indicates the way into the holy places, the true Holy of Holies, the actual presence of God. That's not opened as long as the first section is still standing. And that first section, which we see in the temple as the holy place, that's symbolic for the present age. That era, that way of relating to God has to pass away in order for us to have access to the true presence of God through Christ. According to this arrangement, gifts and sacrifices are offered that cannot perfect the conscience of the worshiper. So we agree that the dietary laws and the sacrificial offerings, none of those dealt with the real issue, which is my stained heart and conscience. Sin pollutes that. But it did testify to what Christ would do in a real spiritual, eternal way. So these arrangements, these gifts and sacrifices deal only with food and drink and various washings, regulations, until the time of Reformation. Now again, there are some people who would say, well, the food and drink only refers to what you would bring to God, whether it was the grain offering or an offering of wine or an offering of your harvest or an offering, burnt offering, guilt offering, sin offering, whatever it is. This has to do with approaching the temple in a sacrificial manner to bring a gift to God, for sure. But isn't also within the Mosaic law, isn't me holding to the dietary laws of Israel also a form of honoring and worshiping God? So this is not just about, hey, you worship God by bringing him stuff at the temple. This is about you worship God by the way you conduct yourself as an Israelite in the nation. So I don't think it's fair to say food and drink has only to do with the sacrificial laws. because he wouldn't bring in washings and regulations. That goes beyond just the approaching of the temple. There's clean and unclean laws there. There's washings if you interact with mold. There's washings if you deal with dead bodies. There's regulations until the time of Reformation. And you go, well, that hasn't come yet. Are you sure? Verse 11 says, when Christ appeared as our high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater, more perfect tent, not made with hands, not of this creation, he entered once for all into the holy places to secure an eternal redemption. So I would say the time of Reformation has to do with our high priest finishing his work, which results in a reformation of the old covenant into the new. It's a transition. Things have changed. Things have adjusted. And you have to discern through and have the biblical reasoning to know how to sort through the different laws that we see in the Old Testament. And I think dietary laws per Hebrews 9 and 1 Timothy 4, and let me tell you this, I didn't bring in 1 Timothy 4. This is just like a cherry on top, okay? I brought in Hebrews and Romans, I brought in Colossians, I brought in Titus. This is not one or two witnesses. Acts, the vision, Jesus saying he declares all foods clean. Like, this is a lot of witness. 1 Timothy 4, chapter 4, 1 through 5. Now the Spirit expressly says, Paul speaking to Timothy, in later times some will depart from the faith. How? Well, by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons. Through the insincerity of liars whose consciences are seared. They forbid marriage, and they require abstinence from foods that God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. And you go, well, he's only talking about the clean foods that God gave us to be received with thanksgiving. Or if it is about all foods, he's saying that becomes an issue of salvation for these people, and they're saying you got to do these to be saved. Well, hold on. Verse 4 will clarify. Everything created by God is good. He's not just talking about some foods, some kind of foods. He uses that umbrella term of everything created by God is what? Good. Nothing is to be rejected if it's received with thanksgiving. He's not just talking about meat offered to idols. For it is made holy by the word of God and prayer. So there are people, Paul has been warned by the Holy Spirit, people are going to depart from the simple, beautiful gospel and maybe hold people hostage to these things and say you have to do this to be saved. But it also seems to be indicating that there are things that are unclean that God, frankly, has said you can receive with thanksgiving because he declared all things clean. Jesus declared all foods clean. Peter, Paul declared that everything's clean now. And then you wonder how we find ourselves in Galatians. Chapter 2, when Paul confronts Peter, remember? And he's eating with Gentiles. Well, that's not an issue. This is way later in the New Testament. We've already established you can eat with Gentiles, and they're in the kingdom. So what's the issue? Is he possibly eating foods with the Gentiles that they're accustomed to eating, that the Jews would declare unclean? Because remember, he's afraid of the circumcision party. Paul confronts that garbage. Let me tell you this. I'm going to be open and upfront and absolutely transparent, okay? I don't think this is a silver bullet for people who say, see, dietary laws are still required. But I do think it's, my responsibility to at least let you know. In Revelation 18, it says this. After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She's become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, and a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. All the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her. The merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living. Now, Is this just prophetic metaphorical language? Is there still a category in Revelation when Babylon does fall? If this is in fact not Israel and Jerusalem falling in AD 70, if we can say this is something else, like the Babylon as a system that's existed throughout human history, if this is the once for all Babylon system crashing down and Jesus comes in to decimate it, there is still a category for unclean spirit, unclean bird, unclean beasts. There are a couple things I'd like to propose. This is either hyperbolic, metaphorical language that the people that were receiving this letter would be accustomed to and go, oh, we understand that. Or, okay, there is indeed still that category that God doesn't actually hold people to anymore. Or it's just stating the uncleanness of Babylon itself by using prophetic Old Testament imagery that you would understand, right? Unclean spirit, unclean bird. You would understand like, oh, that's a place where like, yeah, unclean spirits should be dwelling. That's like a territory that is not of God. So is that language being used here? Or is God literally, by this angel, saying, yes, I still have categories for unclean spirit. I just think he's working. This is my perspective. I think as John's receiving this vision, the angel, and God knows this, the angel is using language that the audience would be familiar with. Not to say that those categories are still in play for the people of God. I think that would be reading into the text of it. I think it's just communicating an absolute truth through categories that have existed throughout the Jewish nation for a long time. They would be familiar with that. So I did not get to the Sabbath like I wanted. I did communicate why. I do believe we are not required to hold to the dietary laws of the Mosaic law anymore. I don't see that. And if you're not convinced, that's fine. I'm not telling you not to. I'm just telling you, don't tell everyone else they have to. There's a difference between a personal conviction that is from the Spirit of God and your conscience testifies to that, difference between that and an objective command God makes for all of his people. I don't believe dietary laws fall under that objective command for all of God's people. Did I make my case? I sure hope I did. But again, this is not me telling you, don't hold to the dietary laws. That's dumb. This is me saying, don't tell other people they have to, or they're not really walking in step with the Spirit, or they're not really honoring God the way they could, or God requires it of them, and they're not really enjoying the light of his presence and the light of his fellowship and bearing his name well unless they hold to those laws. Where is that in the New Testament? And you go, well, we don't have to say anything in the New Testament. The Old Testament is witness. Have we not established that things adjust and shift and change function and purpose from the old into the new? And that's not something any denomination made up. There's lots of biblical witness for that.